Hey everybody, it's Fox with FoxeoGames, and let's talk about video games and violence. Yes, I know this is a tired topic. Everyone's been over this topic over and over again, and the reason I want to talk about it now is that it's coming back up and people are starting to try to treat it as a serious issue when I don't believe that it is, and it never has been. Back in the 90s is when this issue really first came up, and there's a good reason for that. It's because video games were still fairly new, and they were just beginning to look more realistic to people that didn't play them. You look at the Atari had, quote, violent, unquote, video games, but the graphics were so bad and so simple at the time that you could barely tell what was what. I mean, it was hard to even tell that you were committing an act of violence in those games. I mean, there were games that were gory, but you didn't know they were gory unless someone pointed it out to you and tried to explain what it was. It was almost like trying to look at, one of those ink blot drawings and figure out what it is. Well, in the 90s, there were a couple video games in particular that spurred this conversation. The most popular and most remembered game being Mortal Kombat, which had a sort of almost digitized characters that looked more realistic than, say, characters from Street Fighter or other games. And then, of course, the video game that featured what we would consider, live action video. Not live in the sense it was being broadcast live, but actual real people were videoed, and then that video was put into the game, low quality as it was, Night Trap. So Night Trap had real video of real people. However, the most violent scene in the game simply featured this dude who was covered in some black uniform outfit, putting this thing around a lady's neck, and then you saw a red liquid going through it, which you would assume was blood. That was the most violent it got. As for Mortal Kombat, it was obviously extremely gory. Now, of course, it bears repeating, it bears mentioning that none of this is real. Okay, none of this is real violence. That's important to note because people have called video games murder simulators. They say that, for example, on this video game, you kill hundreds, even thousands of people. No, you've never killed a person in a video game, ever. Ever. You've never done it. You've never killed anything in a video game because nothing in a video game exists. It's not real, it's not alive. They're just pixels. You've made a pixel occupy the same spot as another pixel, which overwrites it with something, essentially. When Link from The Legend of Zelda sticks his sword out, that pixel covers the area where another pixel was, and then the game interprets it as a clash of hitboxes in which your sword's hitbox overlapped the hitbox of the enemy character, and now the enemy character has a factor reduced, a variable, which is their usually referred to as their life meter or health or whatever. There is no real killing going on, and it's not even similar to it in any way, shape, or form. Call of Duty does not train you to be in the military. It doesn't even train you to shoot a weapon. You take the average person who's only played Call of Duty and never actually used a real weapon, put a real weapon in their hand, and it would probably take them quite a while even to figure out how to reload it if they didn't already know, or how to even get a round racked into the chamber, or how to do anything with a rifle. So no, these aren't murder simulators or anything like that. The reason this debate comes up is because on the surface, you might start to think, well, it makes sense. You consume violent media, you might commit a violent action. Superficially, that makes sense. However, when you dig deeper, it doesn't actually make sense. Because that would say that if you're watching a movie and there's a scene where two people are doing something, or one person is doing something, that you are now therefore more likely to do it yourself. So if you watch a scene of someone jump off a bridge, you're going to go jump off a bridge. If you watch a Jackie Chan movie, you're going to go do that. Well, some of these movies may inspire you to want to do things that are good, or want to do karate, or want to do some sort of martial arts, but playing a video game has no causal link to inspiring or encouraging people to commit a violent act. We know this through many different factors, not the least of which is a major correlation between the consumption of violent media going rapidly up and the actual acts of crime, violent crime, going down. This is what is it called? A reverse correlation link, I think is the term for it. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I want to sound more intelligent in my next video. But basically, as consumption of violent media has increased, the amount of people committing violent acts has decreased. However, I don't think those two caused each other. I don't think people stopped committing violence because they were playing violent games. I think we were just doing things as a society to reduce violent acts, while simultaneously we just also happened to be playing more violent games because games were growing as a medium. Correlation doesn't prove causation. This is something we've always known. One way to prove this is to look at a number of different factors where we know there's no causal link. Most mass shooters in the United States wore socks at some point, usually wear socks. However, the wearing of socks has nothing to do with the act of committing mass violence or a mass shooting. They just happen to be correlated. Correlation doesn't prove causation. Causation is an entirely different factor, and in the numerous studies conducted over decades on children and some adults, we cannot find any correlation between violent media and committing violence, much less a causation. That is very significant. We can't even correlate the two acts, much less find a causal link or link them or say that one causes another. This is a huge thing. They don't even correlate. Because even if they correlated, that still wouldn't prove anything. It would just suggest more possible research to try to find a causal link. When you're studying something for decades and cannot even correlate that one thing leads to the other, it's time to quit. You're doing it wrong completely, or it simply doesn't have any causal link whatsoever. We've been working on this and working on this. Let me give you another example of an area where science or researchers or whatever brand of whatever institution of education or whatever field of study has been looking at something and cannot correlate it. Fat and the consumption of fat in our diet. Remember the craze of low fat still exists today. You know, you find all sorts of things bragging about how low fat they are on the front of the package. In America, we eat less fat than ever before in history, at least we did at a time when low fat was pushed very heavily, and we became more obese than ever before in history. We were becoming more obese, eating less fat than ever, and yet we still see nutrition scientists trying to prove some sort of causal link between the consumption of fat in a diet and becoming fat. Of course, I believe through a variety of reasons, including tons of research and nutrition study, that eating fat is perfectly fine, it's good for you, and it does not cause you to become fat, even though, you know, on the surface that might make sense, but it's not the case. Your body needs fat. Fat is healthy for you. If you don't eat enough fat, your body tries to create the fat it needs, and if it can't create the fat and you don't eat it, eventually you will die. So no, this low-fat craze has not even correlated with a reduction in the amount of fat that people put on their body. So again, no causal link has ever been shown, can ever be proven, between consumption of dietary fat and becoming fat or getting heart disease or any of these other things. But yet, we continue to believe this because it's just been told to us. So many people out there just believe that consuming violent media, particularly video games, because you put your hand on a controller, a keyboard, and mouse, and you do it, they believe that there's some sort of causal link. They believe in the back of their mind that no matter how many studies prove it's false, that I just feel like in my heart, like, it's just somehow related. That's what a lot of people think, especially older people who didn't grow up with games. So to them, it's really easy for them to demonize video games. They didn't grow up with them. They never really played them. They want nothing to do with them. They're weird. They're different. They're strange. They don't understand. And ignorance breeds fear. And fear breeds an environment of unreasonableness where people start to do things that aren't reasonable, like blame. We like to blame things that we're scared of for the things that we don't like. So, no, we have actually shown a reverse correlation between consumption of violent media going up and acts of violence actually going down. There's no causal link between consuming violent media, playing violent video games, and committing acts of violence, despite numerous attempts to prove it. I mean, people have gone out of their way to try to prove it. They're not even being in the least bit unbiased. Like, they're literally trying to prove their point, and they still can't when they do these studies. They're orchestrating these studies and putting them together in such a way to try to achieve a desired result, and they still can't get it done. Same thing with, nutrition science and the demonization of fat or sodium and things like that. We believe these things because we've been told these things for so long, and on the surface they make sense. They seem reasonable on the surface that we just can't let go of them. Video games don't cause violence. Violent video games don't cause us to be violent. They don't train us to murder. They just don't. Alright guys, leave your comments below. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time.